everyone. My name is Diana Senwasain, and I am the Marketing and Events Coordinator at YSpace. And I would like to welcome you to Founder Fundamentals, hosted by YSpace and the Markham Small Business Center. We really are excited to be able to relaunch this series to you all. Our last version of the series that kicked off actually last fall was a really huge success with over 1,200 attendees that joined us from around the world. The quality of the workshops really surpassed our expectations, and we got a 4 out of 5 rating from over 80% of you. And we saw so much interaction from each and every session. And with this edition of the series, we really hope to keep the momentum going with new facilitators and fresh new topics. Now, as some of you may already know, we announced the extension of YSpace to include the new YSpace Digital, York University's virtual incubator for students, faculty, alumni, and community members. Through YSpace Digital, we offer a number of programs and services, including Founder Fundamentals, this program, Venture Catalyst, idea consultations. We also have a virtual tech accelerator, a virtual food accelerator, a virtual food membership, as well as many other programs and services. Just a quick reminder for anyone new joining us, if you can have your mics muted just so that we don't hear that background sound. Now, I do want to remind you that we do have applications open for our YSpace Technology Accelerator, which is a free 4-month program supporting pre-revenue technology ventures. We also have applications open for a Venture Catalyst program, a 6-week program for tech ventures to go from ideation to MVP. We'll be linking both programs in our chat box as well. Now, YSpace has so many diverse programs to help support entrepreneurs that are open to anyone worldwide. So I really do encourage you to take advantage of all of the resources that are available to you. Now, for today, we have a really great evening planned. And if it's your first time attending a Founder Fundamentals event, please do type your name in the chat box so we can give you all a warm welcome. I'd also like to know where you're all joining us from. So if you can type in your location so that we can see where everyone is joining us from, that would be great. Because I know we usually have people from all around the world, so not just Toronto based or Ontario based, but from all areas. So I see that we do have some regulars back here. People from Toronto, of course, York Region, Markham, Durham, Woodbridge, New York City. Some more people from Toronto. We have someone joining us from India as well. Markham, Georgia. Hi, Carolyn. Some more people from Toronto, North York. So it seems like we've got lots of local people today, as opposed to the international, which is still really good. That's still really good to see. So we have a really great evening planned. Oh, I see David from Indiana, USA. Hi, David. So it's so great to see all of you joining us today. Now, although the sessions are completely virtual, the 11 workshops that we have in the series are really meant to provide hands-on learning, led by experts, and provide you with the resources that you can use to help build your startup. Now, most of you know that if you do attend at least 9 workshops in the series, you will receive an Innovation York Certificate of Recognition after our last session has ended. Keep in mind that you must stay for at least 1 hour in each session for your attendance to be counted. And we do that automatically through Zoom, so nothing else is required on your end. Also, all of our workshops are posted on our YSpace YouTube page. Julia will be linking that in the chat box for you as well. Now, the series could not be possible without the help of so many people helping behind the scenes. And I do want to take a minute to acknowledge David Kwok, who is our Associate Director of Entrepreneurship at Innovation York. So David has worked really hard to source all of our amazing facilitators that we've had in the series. And he has been really great in the chat, helping answer so many questions. I also do want to let you know that we have Julia, who has been doing her co-op placement with us, joining us as well behind the scenes. And Julia will be in the chat to help answer any other questions that you may have. I do also want to take a moment to thank our partners, the Markham Small Business Center, for providing their support with the series. And I do want to welcome their coordinator, Tiffany, on screen to say a few words. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, great. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, David. Very happy to be here again today representing the City of Markham. So the Markham Small Business Center is a government office from the City of Markham. And so it's always great for me to see locals joining these sessions, but also people from around the world. I love seeing that we're able to reach this wide breadth of talented entrepreneurs out there. So our office provides advisory services, education, and consultations for any sort of startup business. We also provide some access to grant funding opportunities for Markham-based businesses. There's one program I just wanted to give a little bit of a highlight about, called our summer company program. So if you do happen to be a student in Markham, you don't have to necessarily be, you can be a high school student, a post-secondary student, um, between the ages of 15 and 29. You can look into this program called Summer Company. It's an Ontario-based program. So if you don't happen to live in Markham, that's okay. Take a look at the other 57 small business centers around the province of Ontario, and you can look for some more information. Essentially, the program is a funding and mentoring and training program. So you get access to grant funding up to $3,000, but also mentoring and training, and that's the really exciting part. So this is the Summer Company program. I'm going to type in the chat the Markham website that will take you to their Summer Company page. And then you can also look at the Summer Company page on the Ontario website as well if you're looking for your appropriate city. Okay. Just thank you again for being here, everyone. It's always exciting for us to see there's such an appetite for these types of topics. If anyone has any questions about starting their business in Markham, or even just trying to reach out to the Small Business Network in the province of Ontario, please let me know, and I'll happy to chat. Thanks so much, everyone. Enjoy.
Thank you, Tiffany. So many great resources for everyone. So I really do encourage you to check out the website that's linked in the chat. Now, in terms of the session today, just some housekeeping. I do want to remind everyone to keep their mics muted. And if you do have a question, feel free to use the reactions. So there's a raise hand function in your reactions section at the bottom of your screen. You can also type your question in the chat box as well. If you do use the raise hand function, we will allow you to unmute your mic and ask your question for our speaker, or you can type it in the chat box, whatever you're comfortable with. Now I would like to welcome our speaker, Rishabh Varshney, who was previously the CEO of Buy with Impact, a credit card which lets users offset their carbon footprint from spending automatically. Prior to that, Rishabh worked at Facebook on Messenger monetization to scale revenue. Rishabh has also been building and scaling teams across financial services, marketplaces, and community-driven applications since 2010. Welcome, Rishabh.
Hey, good to be here. I'm hoping to impart some of my learnings and mistakes that I've made. So we'd love to help you out on the journey as much as possible. Should I just start sharing my screen?
Yeah, you can go ahead and share.
Awesome. Yeah, as Diana mentioned, thanks for that intro, but also if you have questions, post them in the chat or raise your hand. With that out of the way, let me share my screen. Can everyone see it okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Sweet. I can give you an intro again. I basically went to art school, OCAD. So if you're trying to be an entrepreneur, you don't need to go to top schools effectively. You can kind of make your way forward and go through it the way that you want. So I went to OCAD for integrated media, which is like this weird mashup of learning whatever you want across disciplines. But I at the time I was 18 years old and I couldn't figure out what to do next, and I couldn't get into business school because my grades were trash, to be honest. And I didn't have money for UFT's business program, which was like $10,000 plus per year, whereas OCAD was like $4,500 per year. But let's face it, I would have become a classic MBA student if I had gone to UFT, and I don't know if I would have picked up any skill sets to build anything. So I don't know if that was the right or wrong decision, but ultimately, I kind of made my path through that process. I co-founded this random company called Basmati Labs Inc. in 2013. It was like a bunch of friends and I just working on side projects effectively, but that turned into Buns later on, which we grew to about 500,000 people in 200 plus 50 cities worldwide. We raised a seed round, a Series A, and a Series B. So I had some success there. Then I got really burnt out in 2017 and got a job at Facebook where, that was like one of the first jobs that I could get. But anyways, at Facebook, I was just hired on their monetization team and they gave me one goal, like hit $1 billion in ARR from $100 million. So they gave me a year to do it. We did that in like 6 months. Our team was pretty small, but we were able to do it. And then I moved back to Toronto and somehow became a CEO of a company at 27 years old. Built a team of 6, full-time people with like 4 to 6 contractors at any given point in time. Eventually, we pivoted from this, wealth management company that we created into that carbon offsetting credit card, and eventually got acquired. And so this year, my job is to really convince founders either to take my money as an angel investor and figure out what to do next, or if I can help them out by imparting some of my learnings and failures from over the years, and I'm more than happy to do that as well. So let's go into the journey a bit more, just so I can figure out if I can impart some early learnings. Especially when I was like a teenager, I was messing around with graphic design at the time. I pirated this copy of Photoshop to play around with it. And at the time, there's a number of forums like game renders and game trailers. So I would make random graphics for people. They're really weird niche communities at the time, and forums were really popular. But by no means was I good at this or even knew anything about art or design or anything about building a business. But at the same time, it was a brand new industry and brand new way of creative output that I hadn't really experienced before. But that will ultimately become the future foundation of my future skill sets. Photoshop was really the aha moment. I acquired it from a friend who had pirated it anyway. And then at the time, that was the only offering. Now we had everything on Webflow and Figma and whatever else. But Photoshop at the time really helped me get creative and figure out, how to do things that other people really weren't doing. For a long time, I've always felt a belief that competition is for losers. I don't know if anyone's ever read that, but highly recommend it. I stumbled upon that when I was a teenager, and I don't think I've ever looked back. But I didn't really take it seriously for a long time because it was really a small minority of people that were doing stuff with Photoshop. So as I was playing around with these digital tools like Photoshop, I started getting to video editing as well. So these new websites started popping up that if you started creating content, they would give you points, and then you can redeem them from points for a PlayStation or a hat or whatever else. Kind of rewards points, but this was early in the 2000s, so they weren't ads built out, and the rewards weren't that good, to be honest. But at the same time, when you're a teenager, you're broke, and someone can offer you a PlayStation by putting a little bit of time and energy into it, you're 100% going to do it. But looking back at it now, I was enterprising in a brand new industry that didn't really exist any at the time. You can call it creator economy now, but at the time it was just a bunch of degenerates playing around with Photoshop and random gaming products like this. But ultimately, that paved the way for the tech industry forward, I guess.
Sorry, Rashab, I'm just going to stop you there for a minute. We just got a comment in there that
Sure.
the mic is a little bit muddled. I'm wondering if you can possibly speak a little bit louder. I don't want you to hurt your voice, but maybe a little bit louder.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll try. I've been in meetings all day, so it's been hard to project. All right. So in 2009, I got into OCAD because at the same time, my grades weren't that good for a lot of classes. But I had at the time, the only requirement for OCAD was you had a portfolio. It didn't have to be that good, but there was only a couple hundred people getting accepted anyway per year. But and you also needed a 70% minimum in English, which I had 75. I was hell yeah, I can get into this school because no one else would take me. So I used this creative output that I created from forums and random shit like that to submit to OCAD. And somehow I got in. I got rejected from their design program, but kind of worked out better. So I got into fine arts. But they were basically saying, hey, we're short of students in this program, so if you don't join it, that program won't fly. And ultimately, that's where I got in because I didn't know what else to do at the time. Anyways, those creative outputs that I was doing with forums and getting critiques through those forums and whatever, not only did it get me into OCAD, but I was still doing that same work at the same time. So after sharing my portfolio and a critique, a friend of mine saw some of the web design work that I was doing at the time. And we were chatting after the class, and he's like, hey, my friend runs this tech conference. Do you want to, talk to them about either building their mobile app and their website? And this was like 2009, so like the iPhone 4 had just come out or something. So like, the tech industry was relatively brand new, at least in terms of mobile and mobile development. And like I was like one of the handful of people that had that skill set, or not even skill set, like just a way to think about it and actually go and execute on that. And this conference turned out to be like the biggest tech conference in Canada at the time. It was called the Canadian Undergraduate Tech Conference. And for me, like I didn't really see any risk or anything with that, that conference or learning about this new industry, because at the time I was like an avid learner, still am. But at the time I was like really like, yeah, fuck yeah, like sign me up. Like what else do I got to lose, right? So like not a lot of people were designing products or shipping mobile apps, and I got to be one of the first few people, at least like within the Canadian ecosystem, to like learn these skill sets and actually apply them, somewhere else. So during this conference, I started like networking with people. So like I was designing this mobile app. Like it doesn't look any that great right now, but at the time, I think like it was the beginning of a career. So I started networking with people, and like the stuff that I was doing here, got taken relatively seriously. Like I was still a joke, but ultimately, like a lot of people did come up to me and be like, "Hey, can you help me design this next product that I'm thinking about?" Or, "Hey, can you help me like figure out how to design this application or this website or whatever it may be?" And being naive at the time, I was like, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it for free. Like, fuck it. Like, what else do I have to lose? Let me just learn about it as much as I can." And at the same time, like, I was working at Home Depot part time. Like I would do the night shifts, like from either 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. or sometimes I'll have to go in there at 5 a.m. to 9. Then I'll go to class and then work on random startups or random side projects afterwards. This is one of the first companies that I co-founded. It's called FanCrank. It was like this social loyalty rewards made simple. It was basically like a B2B enterprise solution, but this is kind of like the experience that I had from some of these forums I was telling you about before. But I joined them in 2011 or 2012 while I was at OCAD and working part-time at Home Depot. But this would eventually, spin out into, a failure. It wasn't anything about the product. I think it was just wrongly timed. I think if we had launched it, a couple of years later, it would have been pretty successful. But ultimately, this was my first foray into the startup world. And that just happened because I was at this conference that I was, building and designing these apps for. And someone ended up coming up to me afterwards and be like, "Hey, can you join this company and figure out a way to make this work?" And it was familiar enough to me, like this notion of, fan points or whatever, that I could go in and build something within that industry and not have to worry about like, learning up or picking up a new skill set. But regardless, the company went bankrupt after 10 months. I think we tried doing too much. I don't know if anyone's heard that saying, companies drown, they're never starved. So there's always work to be done. And you almost, try doing too many things at the same time and you end up drowning. So that was my first experience of running a startup. But anyways, I didn't take that failure to heart. Obviously, it was part of the learning curve, as I like to call it. And at the time, like I still had this job at Home Depot, which, to be honest, like I probably should have quit sooner than I did. My second startup was way more successful, but this time around, it was also a lot more work. So somehow, one of the conference tech leads, like Francis, he reached out to me through like a Facebook message. He was just like, "Hey, I'm building this product called Rice. This is location-based trading app, which look to connect people with cool stuff nearby." I was like, "Oh, this is a pretty interesting concept. Let me go and figure out how to either add value or like learn about this industry." So I didn't really see this as a waste of time or a risk at all. It helped me figure out how to become a better product designer, because ultimately at that point in time, like really that space that I was playing in. And so we started building this app between 2013 to 2014 in our spare time. And we launched it as a beta because like I accidentally, when I was like setting up MailChimp, and like we had a bunch of people from like our friends and family give us their email addresses for this app to be live at some point in time. So like while I was setting up MailChimp, I accidentally hit send as like a test message to like a couple hundred people. And it's like, "Hey, the app is ready, go download it here." But like obviously the download link didn't work because we were still pulling it out. But anyways, little did I know that like the email had a few people that were quote unquote competing with what we were building. And this included a few people from this team called Shuffle that were building a similar competing product. So essentially, the Shuffle team were a few ex-bankers, mostly from TD Bank, who were trying to look at competing with Kijiji and Craigslist of the world and a number of other buy, sell, and trade marketplaces, and bring it into the modern world. And then at the time, the modern world, at least in terms of mobile apps, was like location services, better push notification permissions, and more localized content. But the difference between Rice, like our random app that we were building for like a year, and Shuffle was like the Shuffle team had money. Like they actually had raised like a pre-seed round, and we had like no money at all, but we had the technology. So it kind of made sense to merge up. So we ended up merging with that team back in at the end of 2013, I think it was. So that was like my first experience of M&A process effectively. And I didn't ever expect it to happen, but ultimately at the time, it kind of made sense not to compete with each other, especially in Toronto, where tech companies were at the time like there weren't that many of them, and like it was really hard to compete and buy market share. Whereas in the States, you can launch up like 10 different competitors, or even globally, you can launch like a couple different competitors, and there are ways to compete within that market by just offering table stakes functionality, right? So after a few heavy conversations between both of our teams, we decided to merge and tackle the giants being like Kijiji and Craigslist of the world. And eventually, like that product turned into Buns, and I'll get into the story of like how it turned into Buns in a bit. This was Shuffle in the early days. We really saw it as like a Tinder for your stuff. So this is like a buy, sell, and trade marketplace. So like we would match you effectively. Like if you liked an item on my card or on my profile, and I liked a card on your profile, it would create a match, and then you can go and make an offer that way and become like really hopefully like enamored by the location services features that we had built out. And we were building this out in our spare time again, because like most of us had day jobs, or if not, then we were in school still. Like in the case of our iOS developer, he was still a student at U of T doing his, I think he was doing a master's program, I can't remember, but he ended up dropping out eventually. So we worked out of this like company's boardroom, and so I would pay them like literally $100 a day. So like every Tuesday and Thursday, $100 would go out of my pocket or someone else's pocket, and we would work out this boardroom of a company that was slowly going bankrupt and eventually shut down. But that was like the first. I would call it like kind of like how ramen became like a symbol of being profitable enough to feed yourself ramen. Like that was like our way of saying, hey, we're profitable enough to actually pay for the space and actually work out of somewhere. But ultimately, we thought this like Tinder model on the product side would actually take off. It didn't. Turns out people don't really give a shit about transactions. They're more interested in meeting people that are like-minded. So to give you an example, if you and I aren't into similar, let's say vintage records, or we're into the same like types of cameras or whatever it may be, the chance of us meeting up and actually becoming friends is significantly higher. And really, like that was a problem that was worth solving, and not this like transacting marketplace, because you could go to like Kijiji and whatever else at the same time. And our team was like still pretty small. It was like 5-6 people working on it relatively in their spare time. So like I ended up having to do a lot of the front end development work. And that was not a skill set I had. Like that was something that I had to pick up, because if I didn't pick it up, then our company would just go under, and I don't want to make that happen again. Because the last thing you want is like for your immigrant parents to look at you and be like, hey, this guy's a failure, because that's not that wouldn't fly in my household at least. So like I was seen as a black sheep of the family for probably, I still am probably, but at the same time, like at that time at least, I was definitely the black sheep of the family without anything to show for success. So we were running out of money, because we didn't actually fundraise anything for that product. And I realized like I had to get a job at the same time to make ends meet. Like at this point in time, it was really hard to work on side projects. My days became really long, really fast. Like in the mornings, I would wake up, go to class, and then from like 8 to 4, and then after 4 o'clock, I would work on this product. So like it was hard to keep a secondary job, but ultimately I ended up getting a job in this company called Rhythm Music Messaging. And Rhythm was interesting because like they helped me figure out how to build products and how to scale a company. Because at its peak, like Rhythm had like 1 million active users. We raised something like $4 million, and I was working there more or less like full time. But essentially, I would work on this side project after hours as much as possible, because I really thought there was something there worth building. So Shuffle was like a failing startup. Like this is like the mock-ups that I created to build out this product set and the features that we thought were table stakes. We didn't really have many users. I think we had like 5 users that we paid for, but we didn't really get anywhere. And we paid for them through like Facebook ads, or sometimes they were friends and family, but they wouldn't really stick around, wouldn't really do a whole lot in terms of using the product and getting us feedback to make it better. And a lot of the feature sets that we ended up building out just didn't work. Like we spent like an entire 6-month period, I remember very clearly, just building out some feature sets that users had requested. And once we built it out and actually shipped them to production, no one used them. Not a single person that said that the user that they would use the feature that we built, use the feature that they asked us for. That was like one of my first kind of like learnings. Like don't build what people want, figure out what they actually want and build that instead. But anyways, we ended up deciding to pivot to something else at the same time. So this Facebook group came out of nowhere. It was called Buns. And when we heard about it, it was like maybe 5,000 people. And we're looking at it like they're doing the exact same thing we are. Like, why is it that this Facebook group has way more users than our product that we built in-house? So we started talking to this team at Buns. It was just like two people. It was like Emily and David. We reached out to this Facebook group just to see if there's a way to partner up with them, because ultimately the name of the game for this mobile company or this mobile product was users. And we really didn't have any. And they had users, but they didn't have any the technology that we had built out or this mobile application. And once we started talking to them, we realized that like, hey, they were thinking about maybe making an app as well, but we kind of beat them to the punch and made it ourselves. So eventually, coincidentally, the Shuffle team CEO knew the people that were running the Facebook group. So we ended up getting in touch and figuring out a partnership structure. So we somehow convinced our team to join us, and we rebranded our product to Buns. Now, this was interesting because like we ended up changing the deck of cards on the homepage, for example, to like this list view, kind of like how Facebook does it. But at the same time, we also, focus a lot more on user retention rather than spending like, $500 a week or whatever it was to acquire users that don't stick around. And so like at the same time, like I didn't want to build anything anymore that just didn't, achieve the goal of growing our user base. And so as a team, we started exploring a bunch of different options, whether it was creating content or, trying alternative methods to acquire users. And some of this, what we call natural marketing, worked out really well for us. Like it was not your traditional way of marketing a product or building a product. It was definitely not polished. It had a lot of like sexual innuendos. People were trading like weed and like drugs and beer and like everything else in between. But ultimately, like, we decided to go a bit more into the vices. And that actually got us more growth because it turns out people don't really care about transactions. They care about meeting the other person more so than they do about the transacting capabilities of a product. And once we realized like that was what people wanted, we ended up pivoting our entire product around that specifically. And I think we grew from like 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to like 100,000 users really quickly. In addition, we also raised like $1 million from this angel investor who was also using Buns. And I think like that was our lucky break to go and build out a product and a tech company in our full capacity. So in 2014, I decided to go full time onto this venture, and that was the first time I actually took on that kind of risk. It was the first time actually, building something from the ground up with $1 million in the bank with us, team working on it full time. And it was like a breath of fresh air, honestly. Any questions so far before I go continue with this journey? No? All right. So in the fall of 2016, we basically launched Buns, the first version of it, like after being in beta for a number of months. So this is a fully functional application with some semblance of brand and enough bells and whistles to move over a lot of community members from Facebook to the application. But we never shut the Facebook groups down. We let them run on their own as much as possible, because for us that was like organic community growth. If a person on Facebook knew about Buns and they created their own groups, for example, like that got us more users in the long run. So we tried to replicate some of these, what we call Buns zones in the application, and it failed spectacularly because, again, it turns out people want to connect with each other rather than focus on transactions. At the same time, like we started expanding into like other cities like Montreal, Vancouver, Austin, Texas. Someone moved to like Nairobi in Kenya and took Buns with them because what happened was they heard about it, they used it in Toronto, and then once they moved to a different city, they ended up starting a Facebook group and then eventually using the application when it got too big. I think at one point in time we were growing like 300% month over month, which is kind of insane to think about it. And we kept that up for like a year. So that kind of growth like got us a lot of retention, and we were able to raise a Series A round of about I think 8 or 9 million. I can't remember what it was. But ultimately, I realized at this point in time that no matter how much we tried to optimize for exchanges or transactions, it wouldn't fly. So we ended up rejigging the product a bit more. So I got larger avatars in place, for example, versus like the small icons that we had before. We made it more localized in your region. So if you were from Parkdale, Ontario, for example, we would show Parkdale on your profile rather than Toronto, Ontario. And at the same time, we made a lot of strides in user retention. So we figured out that if we can get a user to create a post within the first 7 days of signing up, and the chances of them sticking on the platform for at least 6 months were significantly higher. So we started optimizing our product to, address those goals and address those user journeys. And ultimately, that's how we were able to be successful.
So we
And
do have,
anyways,
sorry to
sorry, go ahead.
interrupt you. We do have a question in the chat,
Yeah.
and this person is wondering what startup incubators were you a part of?
So for this product and this company, we didn't actually apply to any incubators. This is completely like self-funded at the beginning until we got some angel money in the door. But every incubator that we applied to, we got rejected because it turns out people don't want to take that risk. I think like people miss out on some good opportunities that way. But I think like incubators have their place in this ecosystem, but you really have to figure out how to best utilize them. Because like ultimately, if we went to the incubator, I think we would have been told, "Hey, this won't work," and we would have shut it down and never revisited it. So it wouldn't have gone from like this buy sell trade marketplace called Rice to Shuffle to Buns. It would have just died at Rice to be precise. I don't think we would have missed out on a lot of opportunities if we took ourselves that seriously. Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
The person favor who asked the question was pretty surprised that you got rejected. He said that's a ton of motivation.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, I got rejected for the next startup too, and then they missed out on an exit. So if you ever get rejected from your incubator, don't take it to heart. A lot of people have told me that I've been wrong my whole life, and they've missed out on some good exits at the same time. So I think like I'll get into some of those mistakes afterwards, but ultimately for me, it's always been about building something worthwhile, and if it's worthwhile, you'll find a way to build it.
Mhm.
And no matter if people tell you that you're wrong, I think there's always going to be opportunities. Like if I can't remember who said this, I think it was Henry Ford. He's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. And I think that's very true today too. So don't take that too hard if you do get rejected from whatever you apply to.
Good advice. We have two more questions in the chat
Sure.
as well. Next question is, you mentioned that you're more on the creative side and your strength is not programming. What advice
Yeah.
would you give to others who have no programming skills looking to develop a tech app, and how do you go about finding the right programmers?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like programming is something that I had to do because ultimately, my own money was on the line. So for like from when we were building out buns and rice and whatever else, like I had invested like 40, $50,000 of my own savings, like literally like my bank account was zero at the time, in order to pay our developers or pay for the office space or pay for like services like AWS. AWS is freaking expensive for no fucking reason. Like we were spending like $1,000 or $2,000 every like 2 weeks on that. Like that was coming out of my pocket. It's like you can either learn how to code and do it yourself, or you can hire a developer, which is going to cost you like 10x more. But ultimately, for me, it was like, okay, I can solve this problem, so I can get it to a point where it's good enough that I can launch something, and then eventually fire myself from that role when I can afford to. And that's the road that I went down for every single venture that I've gone through so far. Get good enough at that, make it shippable at least, and then fire yourself from that role when you're ready to do so.
I guess it's never fun firing yourself.
I don't know. I enjoy it. Whenever I can fire myself now, I'm just like, yes, this company's gonna be successful. Because like ultimately, like I know that now I can focus on either the business side of things, or I can focus on the product side of things, or I can focus on user growth or whatever. And in terms of like finding a developer, I think like I exhausted my network of convincing people to join me. And eventually I found that like, the best person is the person with the right attitude and not the best resume. And those people have been tremendous in giving me the highest ROI for that investment. Because I can hire them for relatively cheaper than someone from like Google or Facebook or whatever. But ultimately they'll stick around for longer and actually polish up their own skill set. So if you invest in that person, the chance of them becoming successful with you are significantly higher as well. And I think that mindset has helped me a lot over the years.
Now, we have a follow-up question from Rose who asked the initial question, and she's just wondering if you have to rewrite your app in the future if you do that.
I feel like you might run into that problem. To be honest, to give you an example, like the Buns app that's right active right now, I still see some of the same code that I wrote like 5, 6 years ago. It's still there. So like I don't think you'll have to ever fully rewrite it. I think you'll have to rewrite like parts of it or make them better over time. But I think like rewriting is a tremendous cost. I encourage you not to do it. Like it doesn't really matter to a user if it's like 2 seconds slower. But ultimately, it's really something that's contextual. So like if you do have to rewrite it, it's probably something that you might have to figure out on your own. But I think for me, it's always been like, you don't have to do that unless you absolutely need to.
Okay, great. So next question, a couple more questions, sorry, in the chat
Sure.
that keep coming in. For a transactional marketplace, in order
Yeah.
to increase the MAU and retention, is it a marketing play or is it about product alignment?
I would say it's more product than it is about marketing, because I'll give you an example. Like at some point in time, we were spending, when we raised like Series A round, we were like spending like $10,000, $20,000 on Facebook ads every month, which is insane. But the thing is, like, if you put that user into a leaky bucket and you're only retaining about 80% of them from the sign up flow to when they actually create a post, for example, that $10,000, $20,000 you're spending is actually worthless, because if you can't retain that user in the long run. And the way that users are retained, especially now, is not through like marketing or re-engagement. They're retained on the product. Like if you use Slack, you're going to use Slack. It's like no matter how many emails they send you, you're never going to go back to it if you're not an active user for it, right? I think like that's been my learning. It's like, you focus more on growing your user base by retention rather than spending a lot of money on ads.
Okay, and one more question in the
Sure.
chat comes from Sarah. So Sarah's saying, I've applied to grad school that would help give me credibility for my social enterprise idea, and I've been rejected multiple times. It's got me feeling stuck. Any thoughts about getting unstuck and building credibility on my own?
Yeah, you can build credibility on your own. I think that's almost the better way of doing it. I think grad schools are overrated. And to be honest, like having worked at Facebook and some of these and have talked to like a bunch of like larger companies as well, they're not even looking at that. I think social enterprise is something that you can do and set up something for yourself. So I would highly encourage you to just build something and get it out there and see what the response is, even if it's just like a landing page or Instagram tests. That's how we built Buy with Impact, for example, this carbon offsetting credit card. Like I don't fucking know anything about finance, and I'm sure like someone with a better financial service angle would have built a better CEO for that company, but ultimately that was a role that I had to grow in. And I think like there's a lot, way more opportunities for you to go around on your own rather than being stuck in a mindset of grad school or whatever they teach you there. Because ultimately, I don't know if you'll get that value out of it. But what will happen is like you'll come up with like these biases later on that you'll never get rid of. And I think unblocking yourself now and not going through the grad school process is the better way to go. Like for me, I don't know what the future holds, but ultimately, I don't think my education would have helped me build these products.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Those are all the questions we have so far.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll go to the next one here. So like when our pivot from buns to like this new like what did I show you before? Like these new zone angle failed. We ended up deciding to just focus down and double down on trade only. So this is like the design stuff that I created. And by the way, like I got voted into the head of product here. Like I didn't choose that title. I was asking a lot of hard questions because at the same time I was getting burnt out. I was like, why am I building this shit if no one wants it? So I ended up having to ask myself and a lot of our team members and community members, what's worth building and what's not. So when we started going back to like the basics of like, just focusing on trade, this gave me a mental break and also gave me a mission to just, understand the user a bit more, understand what people actually want, and then optimize it that way. And ultimately, I think this was really successful for us because this helped us expand in different geographies. This got us like tremendous user growth. I think at this point in time, with like 400 or 500,000 users and with about 23% monthly active users. So that was pretty insane for our marketplace to have those kind of metrics. Like Amazon has like 8% MAUs compared to what we were doing was like 23%. It was kind of insane. At the same time, at the same point in time, like we had a lot of investors reach out to us, a lot of community members move around different cities and bring this with them there. But to say that this was a stressful time wouldn't even come close to the pressure that we were feeling, because like ultimately for us being VC backed, you do have to decide on monetizing a product versus just scaling it at all costs. And it became clear to me that no matter what we did for monetization, this wouldn't work out. Like if we put ads in here, our users will leave, because we tried that out as an experiment and we had a lot of people just bounce. If we put if we sold their data, I think people would be pretty cautious of the platform and not share as much as we expected them to. So we didn't go that route either. And over time, we decided to launch a digital currency instead, kind of like a reward system. Like the more you engage with the product, the more we would reward you. And then you can redeem those points for something else. But to be honest, like I don't know anything about, at least at the time, I didn't know anything about monetary policy or setting up a currency. So I started talking to a lot of economists at U of T, and they made it clear that this currency won't fly because ultimately, if you have a digital currency attached to something like Amazon or Walmart, you can basically buy anything from those services. With Buns, the highest value transaction would be like a $20 case of beer or something like that. wouldn't be like, you wouldn't be able to get everything and anything on the product. It would have to expand beyond at least like our scope and our user base to make this digital currency a reality. Long story short, I kind of saw the writing on the wall and decided to leave Buns in 2017 after being there for like 5 years, literally building it from the ground up, and scaling up the team. Like, I hired every engineer there. Before I left, I hired the other designers there, some of the people on the marketing team as well. And ultimately, I decided to take a step back from it because I didn't want this product to fail because my mental state was not in where the team expected me to be. And like, at the same time, this took a toll mentally, because like there's a lot of pressure on both sides, from like the VCs, from your community members and your team. And if you don't have all the answers as the head of product, then like people are like, well, what the fuck are you doing here? And I feel like I should have got help at the time, but I didn't. And I got really stressed out and really burnt out and ended up just quitting. So I took the first job that I could get, and I worked, went to go and live in California for a few months and work at Facebook. And there, I really learned how to scale a team and step back from kind of like running the day-to-day operations and figure out more process work. Like, how do you scale a team? How do you scale a company to like 20,000 employees? How do you scale revenue from $100 million ARR to 1 billion? And so, as I mentioned before, like, they gave us a year to do it. We did it in about 6 months. And it turns out when you have 1.3 billion monthly active users, it's pretty easy to monetize. So I learned a lot about like economics during this time, a lot about like financial services, a lot about growing teams, a lot about processes, and actually like, finding ways of making things work rather than, being overburdened by them. Any questions so far? Sweet. So this was my third startup. I moved back to Toronto in 2018 because I got bored of building ad products for Facebook. Not that there was anything wrong with it. I just felt like I wanted to do more. Like, I don't know where this itch came from, but like I wanted to start another company, which in retrospect was probably a bad move because I wasn't there mentally, but ultimately it worked out. So I moved back to Toronto, as I said, and I needed a way to expel some of this energy that had built up over time. And so I took a huge gamble, quit my job at Facebook after being there for less than a year, and started this company called Lake Finance. Now, at the time, at the time in 2017, like my head was really into the cryptocurrency space because it was blowing up everywhere. Everyone was like, "Oh, Bitcoin's the future," whatever. So I ended up, just trying to find a job in the crypto ecosystem, and I was, I got rejected from like everyone. If you think of a crypto company or even a financial services company that might have crypto, chances are I applied to them. I got rejected from every single one of them because they looked at my resume and they're like, "Hey, this guy left a startup, went to go work at Facebook, and he quit after within less than a year." Like, that's a red flag to a lot of people, and I get it. I would have not hired me as well. But ultimately, doing this failure process of getting fired, or sorry, not getting fired, but not getting hired over and over again, I was like, fuck it, I'll just make my own job. So I ended up, co-founding this company with a friend of mine, and he was building this arbitrage bot, and I saw that could be a product. And he didn't know how to productize it. So I was like, hey man, can I just bring my product lens to this? Let's figure out a way to scale this up and actually make this a product. And then we'll go from there. Is there a question so far? Cool. So ultimately, this consumer product was almost like ill-timed. I think if we launched it this year or the year before this, I think we would have been really successful. But in 2018, this was like a no-go. And, as I was jobless, I was really adamant to find a CEO for this organization. And over time, as I was hiring some of my friends and people that I knew in my network, they're like, "Hey, I thought you were the CEO." I was like, "No, I'm not the CEO. Like, I know nothing about finance, at least not to the degree that, we need the lens here on." So I ended up having to grow into that role because, some of the other CEOs that I talked to, I was like, "Hey, can you come over and take over as CEO of this company?" They all said no. They're like, "You guys don't know what the fuck you're doing. You're a bunch of like degenerates, thinking about, building a company in the financial services space. I don't think I can help you out there." So like, it was just me and like, one or two friends working out at the same time. So we started figuring out ways to make it work for ourselves almost. Learned a lot about financial services and applied to a lot of boot camps. And luckily we got into CDL, the Creative Discussion Lab blockchain AI program, which was brand new at the time. I think we only got into that program on merit because like I had launched Buns, and at the time Buns was pretty popular in the news. So we ended up going through that program and failing spectacularly because like every single investor that we talked to, or every single company that we talked to there, they're like, "You guys are building something that's really hard to build, and you won't get the regulatory clearance to do so." And they were right. Honestly, they were right. But ultimately, we made this work. We got a team of 6 people working on this full time. I don't know how I was able to convince them to quit their jobs, their well-paying jobs, to work on this completely bootstrapped from like my money or the money that we created as a company. And then we ended up, building this product out for about a year and a half between 2018 to 2019.
So we
Yep,
had a few questions. Actually, they came in just as after you asked me, are there any
sure.
questions? We had about 3 questions come in. So first question is from Ankit. At various times in your career, you had a full-time job and a startup at the same time. What are best practices of handling both at the same time?
Yeah, I think I'm a bit contradictory here because a lot of people will tell you to quit your full-time job and focus on your startup. Don't. Especially if you can't make the next, rent payment or whatever it may be, or if you can't feed your families, then definitely don't do that. I think for me, it really boils down to like division of time. Like, how do I divide my time effectively so I can be effective? So, like, to give you an example, in my day job, I would focus literally from like 8 a.m. to like 4 p.m. And afterwards, I would focus on my startup. And whenever I got bored or whenever I got just interested in doing, one of those tasks that I was doing for that job, I would actually switch over to the other one. And that helped me out tremendously because I could do both jobs at the same time. I think there's been a couple times like I've had more than one job, but I feel like they stress you out quite a bit, and you do end up working a lot of overtime and weekends and late nights. But ultimately, I think I built the company that way or I built companies that way in order to not be broke coming out of it.
Okay, next question is, are you open to collaborations and new concepts?
Yes, hit me up. I've been angel investing recently, so if you want to chat about future opportunities, let me know. But also, I'm actually building, hopefully my next venture soon as well. So if there's anyone who wants to collaborate, send me a note.
Perfect. And then last question is, oh, sorry, someone, please make sure you're muted. Thank you. Next question is from Rose. When at Buns, you
Sure.
mentioned that you were stressed and probably needed to get some help. Can you elaborate on that? And in retrospect, what should you have done to help yourself?
Yeah, I feel like at the time I was really feeling like an imposter. I was like, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve any of the success. I've done nothing. Looking back at it, I think we did a lot, and I don't think we gave ourselves enough credit. I think that's one of my takeaways. And two, we kind of fell into this rut. At least I fell into this rut of like, shitting on everything. I was like, this is not good enough. This is not good enough, or that's not good enough, or whatever. Because ultimately, I became the brand. Like, that was something that like, people would look at me and be like, oh, that guy's from Buns. Like, it's almost like, you have to live and breathe that brand. So like, don't let your company take over you effectively. At the same time, like, it does become kind of toxic when money is involved because you don't know where it's going all the time, and it's hard, especially as a first time founder, to let go of control. I think like at the time I was trying to do way too much, way too quickly, and not trusting enough people to delegate. I think I should have got mental help when I needed it. I should have talked to like better people to help me get out of that mental model of taking everything in and looking at it in a negative way. And I've since worked on myself to look at more of the positive and actually empower people and trust in them way more than I used to. I think that's helped me out tremendously, especially for the last venture. Because like I don't, if I didn't do that, I don't think I would have, that company would have been successful at all.
And while we're on that topic, just a reminder for everyone that we have a really great session coming up on February 11th on mental health for founders. So if you're interested in learning about different strategies and tactics and things that you can do to help yourself, I really do encourage you to register for that event. I see, a few people are asking for your email address. I don't know if you're okay with sharing that in the chat or.
Uh, yeah, just go to my website and send me a note from there. It's probably the easiest. You'll get my email from there
Perfect.
or whatever, or
Perfect.
get into my Twitter DMs by user.
Sounds good. And then next question is, creating enterprises where getting regulatory clearances are an issue. How do you
Hmm.
prove the concept, get funding, and take it from concept to launch?
Yeah, actually, I'll tackle the latter half of that question. I used to think that funding is something, or raising money is something that you do when you needed it. I think that's a wrong way of thinking about it. You should raise money when you look like a good investment, not when you need the money the most, because you'll lose on those terms. I think in terms of like the regulatory clarity, there's a couple of ways to do it. And I've done it with this credit card model, and I'll show you in a bit. But ultimately, I got this wait list up and running quickly before I went down this regulatory path of getting like licenses for issuing credit cards or whatever it may be. With Lake, we didn't do that, and that ended up failing because there was this period of time of like 6 months where all we were doing was like talking to lawyers, talking to people at the OSC. I even debated on moving to like Bermuda at one point in time because like you could get a regulatory license there way quicker and way easily. But the downside there was like one of us on the founding team had to live there permanently while we were running the company. And unfortunately, some of the loopholes that companies like Wealthsimple exploited by acquiring some of these licenses for very cheap. A portfolio manager license was really cheap, a couple of years ago. It's not anymore. Have been closed. So ultimately, if you're going down the regulatory path, I would suggest you prove out the business model beforehand and find a partner that can take that risk on you. Whether it's like someone like Bond Financial, which does like white label products, or maybe a bank or credit union. Start having those conversations early and getting them on board, especially in Canada. But in the States, there's so much competition. You can go to like any bank and be like, hey, can you amend me to your charter so I can go launch this wealth management product or whatever else. And those conversations, frankly, are easier there than they are in Canada. So if you're doing something in the regulatory space, try not to do in Canada.
Next question is coming from Crystal. What is the first mistake made by startups and entrepreneurs out of the top 5 mistakes that you mentioned in the title?
Yeah, I'll get into those mistakes in a bit, but I think, one mistake that I've seen a lot of founders make too early is just continuing to build. I think you don't build unless you know that there's something there. And I've made those mistakes before. Like when we were building rice, we didn't know there's going to be a market for it. So prove out that there's a market before, because ultimately what you don't want to do is like discourage your team or be negative about it when things don't work out. I think that's the same mistake we made with Lake. We tried building this product and we spent like an entire year and a half building it, and no one wanted it. Like we had like 0 users, and like somehow like we had like $250,000 in assets under management, like 1 or 2 people that we convinced into giving us their cash into this wealth management product. But ultimately, there wasn't a whole lot of demand for this product at the time, so we ended up pivoting to buy with impact instead. So I would recommend that you don't build too early. Test out market hypothesis and validate it sooner rather than later, because it's pretty easy to fall into like the known unknown trap. Like that you have to build, so you go build it, but you don't know what to do next afterwards. So I would recommend trying to figure out what to do and how to do it in a more holistic way.
Okay, I think we are good in the chat.
Sweet. So as I said, like we got into this creative destruction lab program to their blockchain AI stream, and we had a hard time with regulators because they just didn't give a shit about our product, and it was hard to have these conversations about the future of finance with people that don't have a financial services background. Like I went to art school, man. Like I don't know anything about finance. But anyways, I had to grow in that role and like ultimately learn about financial services, monetary policy, economics, like almost overnight. Like I had to do this because like if I didn't do it, like no one else would. To be honest, like I couldn't afford economists or whatever to come join our team. I couldn't afford like a regulatory person to come on and talk to us about regulations and whatever else. And believe me, I tried. I exhausted my network and trying to get these people to join me in this pursuit of what I call the future of financial services, but ultimately it failed. But Lake was interesting. Like I think what I got right with Lake was building a team that I could trust. I think with other ventures before this, I didn't really understand how to build a team, at least not to the scale that I wanted to. And ultimately, what I created with Lake was what I called the last team. People that I want to work with for the next 25, 30, 50 years of my life. And these were people in my network, like there's this guy down here, that's my little brother. So I ended up hiring him because like this guy was a G on terms of like, web development and building mobile apps. And I was like, yeah, that's someone I want to work with for the next 20, 25, 30 years. David, who is right here, third from the top, him and I co-founded Buns. He was our head of marketing in there and ended up pulling him into this venture somehow, convincing him to leave his high-paying full-time job to come work with me. And more, as I said, like, this was something that I wanted to build a team around, this notion of find smart people and don't tell them what to do. Give them a direction, but ultimately, if you're hiring smart people, why would you tell them what to do? Leave those details up to them. And another reason for why this team was ultimately successful is because like we created an environment we wanted to be in, both to learn from and mature as leaders. And ultimately, every single person that we hired and brought onto the team, they didn't have a good resume. They might have been straight out of school, or they came from a different industry. Like our head of growth came from customer success. He had no idea what growth was, but ultimately he, like they ended up becoming leaders in that space because they had something to prove, and they wanted to stick around for the long run and learn from each other as much as possible. And that's something that I actually picked up in Silicon Valley when I was there working at Facebook. Like these people understood how to give back and empower each other. I think like that's the reason why like companies in Silicon Valley comparatively to Canada have been successful. It's because they understand what it takes to build someone up, and when they leave, not to look at that as a negative, but as a net positive for your organization. You really measure success by the people that leave your organization and start something new that becomes successful, rather than the people that stick around and you don't do anything with. I think like that's really what we got right. It was the environment that I wanted to be in. So we ended up replicating that here as well. And that's really how we got our growth, our foray into financial services and understanding how to build and scale products from the ground up. Like we had a small office space on Spadina and Dundas. It comfortably fit 4 people in there, but like we fit 10 people in there somehow. And then, the next year after that, since we were completely bootstrapped, didn't raise a single dollar, through consulting contracts and stuff like that, we ended up getting a bigger office and getting more people onto our books and onto our teams, and we had fun with it. I think one of the things I've learned through this entire journey of being an entrepreneur is like you can't take yourself too seriously. Like, and if you're not having fun, like there's really no incentive to do so. If you're not learning, if you're not having fun, and you're not engaging with your team members, like what's the point? Any questions so far?
I have. Can I use the?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So it's a bit off topic, but clearly there are no women on this team, and I was wondering, and I'm participating in programs that encourage women in entrepreneurship, and I'm wondering if you have any, if you recognize it first of all,
Yeah.
and second, if you have any stance which is clear to you, and if you want to share with us. Thank you. And anyway, the talk is super interesting, and thank you thus far.
Yeah, we actually did end up hiring 1 or 2 women on the data science side. This is an old picture, so like it's not representative of the entire team. If you go to the website lake.finance, you'll see the full team that we expanded to later on. But ultimately, as like these were some of my friends that I wanted to bring on over time, and I tried to convince a lot more other people to join me. So these are the only people that wanted to join me through this journey, and I tried my best to get whoever I could and try to get a healthier gender balance. But it was definitely hard. But I don't know why that was.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. As I said, this was kind of stressful, but we were having fun and learning a lot from each other and from the industry that we wanted to play in. So kind of worked out, and we started having more regular like idea sharing sessions rather than being like one directional from like the quote unquote leadership team. So this worked out really well for us in terms of getting people to share ideas openly, and then we can go build them out. Like if someone wanted to run a test or someone wanted to come up with a new concept for a product, they could go do that. They were free to do that. It didn't mean that we owned the IP. It just meant that we could help them figure out what to do with their lives, and we would be the first check on the door. That's really how we approached it. And so, when we were failing as a product company, but we were making money on the consulting side, for example, we decided to explore a bunch of different ideas. One of them was this idea of wealth management, but in the ESG space, like environmental, social governance space. But it's a hard space to compete in because like you can go to Wealthsimple or you can go to your bank and get those same stocks. And I can't compete with that. There's no way I can compete with like someone that has like $4 or $20 billion in assets under management and has raised like hundreds of millions of dollars. And from the small team that's completely bootstrapped, like that's just not feasible. So one of the ideas that came out of the woodworks through these regular idea sessions was like, okay, well, what if we launch a carbon offsetting credit card? Because on one hand, 2/3 of credit card rewards, like airline points or whatever, don't get used. And on the other hand, people had this, like, at least in 2019, and I'm sure they still do, but like, climate change was top of mind, especially because of the upcoming elections, because you saw that like it was getting warmer and warmer every summer, every winter was the warmest on record. So ultimately, we tapped into a mindset that there was something there. We should know what it was. So we created this concept of buy with impact, and I created all these designs because at the time we didn't have another designer to help us with it. So like I was partly the CEO, partly figuring out this product roadmap and strategy, and partly executing on it as well. And ultimately, I ran every single one of these tests as an Instagram campaign, capped at $60, only targeted to 4 cities globally. Or sorry, not even globally, just in the States. I was Austin, New York, San Francisco, and LA. And based on the results that I would get from these Instagram tests, I would then figure out what product to build out and in what order. So that became like the grounds for Buy with Impact. And we figured out a way to not just go to market and acquire users, but also a way to create this financial ecosystem of what we call ethical financial services. Like with money in and money out, you need to be under, people wanted to know where their money was going and where it was coming from. So we ended up, building this product out over time after doing a bunch of Instagram and Facebook tests, and it turned out to be really fruitful for us because we got like 14,000 people signed up to our waitlist. And this was just like a landing page that I put up overnight. I don't even think I spent too much time on the copy or anything else. It was just something that we wanted to test out really quickly because I didn't want to make the same mistake of spending another year or two building something that nobody wanted. And ultimately, we decided to find a way to make the scale. And once we've got those metrics, we ended up joining RBC Ventures as an organization in February 2020. So it kind of worked out for us, but that was like a lot of learnings on my end on how to scale from not just the team, but like how to run these tests and how to get this up and running really quickly without having to spend like a couple of $1 million in ads or whatever it was in order to validate that there's something here. So I would recommend going down that road again, like running these quick tests and figuring out how to best add value from the product side rather than building something that you might think people want. Any questions so far?
Yep. So before you move on, I see that Favor has his hand raised. Do you want to ask your question by unmuting your mic or?
Sure. Thank you. My question is a little long, so
Sure.
to avoid a little bit of confusion. So my first question is, you talked about market research, and that was
Yeah.
one of the, let's say, mistakes you made with Buns. So I hear a lot of people say do primary research, which is talking to people one-to-one, and also secondary research, which is going on sites like Vividata, like Ebit, like all these big sites to get data. So at the moment, because of COVID, I couldn't talk to people face to face, but what I did was my target market for my startup idea is competitive runners. So I went to like groups, and I'm thinking of how to start asking questions and structuring questions in a way that it doesn't look too like a spam, like too spammy. But I wanted to get your thoughts on when you were launching. How did you validate the market? Was it through let's say like speaking to people one-on-one, or just going to sites and getting data?
Yeah, it was one of those weird products that when I started talking to people about, some people said this wouldn't work because they're like, hey, you guys don't have a credit card up and running right now. How would you make this work? And a lot of other people on the consumer side, when I started talking to them, they're like, sign me up tomorrow. I'm going to switch over my entire spending from my current credit card to this one. So here's an example of like the test that I did. As I said, like I ran every single idea that I had to the same audience just to control a lot of different variables. And by the end of it, like I started having conversations to people through Instagram DMs, nothing else. I didn't meet these people face to face. They don't know anything about my product or what I'm working on. But these people were interested in this concept at the very least and wanted to talk more about me through that process. And I kid you not, by the end of every single conversation, I could get this person to connect their bank account, give me their social security number, and whatever else I asked them for. Because I end up establishing trust and creating a relationship with them just through Instagram DMs, nothing else. And they were coming in because they were curious about the content that I started posting. And the only reason I started posting this was because like I didn't want to spend 2 years building something that nobody wanted. And these are just mock-ups that I created myself. Like honestly, like there was no one else involved in this process. And then I ran these as Instagram campaigns. So like when I was looking at, hey, if you could replace every single purchase that you did with a sustainable alternative, would you? And DM me your favorite replacements. This was just an indirect test of this marketplace that I want to build out here with like this brand marketplace effectively. That's what that was a proxy for. This understand your carbon footprint, DM us to get your personalized read. That was just a way for me to test if people will give me their bank account information so I can go scrape their transactions and then give them that kind of data into a product that looks like this that can score different transactions with. So ultimately, that's where I found success. I didn't have to interface with people one-on-one, but through these conversations on Instagram, I could then get them to do whatever I wanted.
Sounds good. And you were basically doing Facebook campaigns to get people to your landing page?
Not even to my landing page, just direct message me on Instagram, because as I mentioned, through that process, I could get you to convert whatever metric I wanted to.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else? yeah, these are like just really quick ways for me to test different things. And I didn't want to spend, as I said, 2 years building it. I can't stress this enough. Like, don't build things. There's definitely someone there that wants it. But yeah.
I do see another question in the chat. So were your product prototypes ready for the A/B testing or the multivariate testing?
No, not at all. I think those would have been nice to have, but ultimately I was on a tight deadline. I was like, I have no money left. Our team doesn't have any money left, and we can't continue consulting and working on this product full time because there's a lot of work, right? But on the same token, I think a lot of people will tell you to run A/B tests, and I think that's valid, but only when you have something up and running in the market. When you're doing stuff like this, my A/B test was like, hey, do I post this campaign first or do I post this campaign first? That was my A/B test. I could have tested out a bunch of different ideas for the prototype or whatever else, but I just wasn't ready for that at the time.
Okay, those are all the questions. Oh,
Sweet.
sorry, one more just came in from Rose. What was your return rate and what metric did you use to determine demand?
Yeah, one second, I want to share my other screen. Okay, so for Buy with Impact, my only metric was how many people can I get signed up to my waitlist, because then I could take that to a financial services partner and be like, hey, we got 10,000 people signed up for this. There's something here. Do you want to partner up to launch this credit card? Our cost of acquisition was roughly $6 per person, and I used new channels like TikTok to get that user base up and running, because they're like weird niche TikTok channels, or I don't even know what they're called, like Zero Waste, that had like 500 million views. I was like, that's crazy. Zero Waste Swaps had another one, and these are like proxies for marketplace tests. And my only metric there was like, can I convince this person to A, sign up for my waitlist, and B, connect their bank accounts, so at least I can scrape that data and build my data models out in-house in order to make ourselves stronger in the long run. But yeah, that was the only metric that I really tracked. Everything else was almost secondary. I didn't really care about the lifetime value of this user, how much they have that they're spending, how much they're spending on their credit card. All that was almost irrelevant. And I think to me, I've also realized that like the only way to combat climate change, at least the way that I want to think about it, was to get a financial incentive up and running here. Because without the financial side, there's really no incentive to combat climate change. I think there's like also a spectrum of users, right? And there's these climate activists and enthusiasts who care about the climate, and they're like, hey, the best way to fight climate change is not to spend money, is to go zero waste completely. But that's just not reasonable for a lot of people. Actually, most people it's not that reasonable for. And so oddly enough, the people that resonated most with Buy with Impact were young parents, because they're like, hey, I have a kid right now, or I have kids right now that I want to get better sustainable clothing for them, or sustainable products like baby pad or whatever else. Because ultimately, if they didn't make those choices, for them, it felt like the world wouldn't be a place where their kids could grow up in the long run. So like that became almost a byproduct of running these tests. I found a lot of parents that resonated with the messaging, resonated with the ideas behind the brand, and they were spending this money anyways. They rather get higher quality items in return or more environmentally friendly items in return for almost the same spend. So hopefully that answers your question. But the only thing I was after was this cost of acquisition essentially. Okay, anyways, Buy with Impact, as I mentioned, ended up joining RBC Ventures in 2020. So I've been there for the last year or so. So I'm still thinking about climate change and financial services. And a few things come to mind in order, for the next opportunity. I've been thinking about like supply chain quite a bit, and how to make sustainable supply chains a reality, especially as we start getting to like TikTok commerce or influencer-driven commerce. I think there's a lot of opportunities for small brands to partner with sustainable supply chains. I've been angel investing quite a bit more and creating frameworks for scaling teams. So I've been trying to impart some of these learnings and processes. And we didn't cover all of them, obviously, but I'm trying to create frameworks for scaling teams and imparting those learnings to people. Try and give back as much as I can. So I've been helping out a few founders over the last couple of months on go-to-market strategy, helping them figure out how to talk to people in financial services or regulators or whoever it may be. And then the last thing is having endless curiosity. I think for me, like one thing that I missed about being a kid was not being curious enough about certain things. I feel like the more curious I get, the more I'm able to take on those learnings from whatever industry that I'm playing in. And ultimately, I think, you need to have that as a founder, or especially if you want to start a business, I think you need to be endlessly curious, because that's how you learn to compete and thrive in that industry that you're building a product in. So, with that being said, I want to share some of my mistakes that I've made. Mistake number one was building what people ask for, literally. I can give you an example. And when we were building rice, then shuffled, then buns, one of the heavily requested features from early users was this really complicated inbox flow. So people are like, oh, I want to be able to accept this trade or reject this trade and go to a separate inbox. Turns out we spent literally like 6 months building this, and every single person that suggested this feature never ended up using it. So just a complete waste of time. Turns out what people really want is a way to categorize their chats, and that could be done in a bunch of different ways, whether it's just like a simple like text label, for example, or letting them favorite certain chats and then unfavorite them later on. We didn't have to go build this really complicated inbox, for example, to make that a reality. I think that was like one of the earlier mistakes I made. And it was just a complete waste of time. Definitely don't recommend doing that, and really dig into what people really want rather than what they're telling you. Because as you know, like if you ask people what they want, they'll say they want a faster horse, but car does the same job, but it's also. So just keep this phrase in the back of your mind. Like I'd argue that if you're building a product, like figure out what people really want and build that instead. Mistake number two was taking myself too seriously. Like sometime between launching a couple companies and running a couple of startups, you start to think that like, hey, you're the serious A player or whatever, but that's often far from reality. And I think if you take yourself too seriously, you also miss out on a lot of opportunities. So this might have been true like decades ago when seriousness in the workspace, and it's still there. Don't get me wrong, but I think you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. Like have some fun with it because life is short. And if you take yourself too seriously, you're just setting yourself up for failure or at least some sort of like mental health issues. So definitely don't do that. And when I was taking myself too seriously, like we had no users on the product anyway, so it didn't really matter what we did with it. So let's just have some fun with it and figure out alternative ways of growing. Like literally take a step back and see what you can do and why you're doing it. And just learn about what you want to build and how to build it. So we ended up rebranding from rice to shuffle to buns, and buns was this really troll brand. I didn't think that it would work, but like we started trolling our user base way more seriously. We started getting into like alternative forms of marketing. Like we started digging into these vices a bit more, and that got us a lot of growth. And we really answer people's questions that they want to. People had questions about like sexuality, they had questions about like living in this world in this day and age. They had their own anxieties that were pent up from over the years or from whatever they were working on. And they really needed an outlet. So we ended up just becoming the outlet for a lot of people in that regard. And that got us a lot of user growth. Yeah, people were still trading and using this marketplace that we had created, but they were coming for the community. And that's really what we built out by, not taking ourselves too seriously. We ended up having some fun with it and actually, growing our user base the way that we wanted to. Because before this, we had very little users. Before we started, having a bit more fun with it, we were just, running circles and like, how do we make this look like Airbnb, or how do we make this look like Facebook or whatever? And it turns out people don't care about that. Like here's like what the profile looked like before, and like I was posting these like high-end items. Like I would go out and try to buy like an Apple Watch or whatever, and post them on the product, but like no one was using them, no one was interacting with it. So eventually we started going to trolling our user base, to building this community organically, to actually like growing the way that if someone approached us for this product, like how would we want to hear about it, or how would we want to use it, we ended up approaching that mindset a bit more. And the funny thing is like at the beginning I was copying like UI from like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and whatever else, and eventually they started copying me by doing some of the stuff that I was doing from this product. So I think like when you put your heart into it and you understand what people want and how to make that a reality, you can have some fun with it. And I think I encourage you to go down that path, because it is quite rewarding, and it's also like it's way less stressful, I would imagine, than if we had taken ourselves so seriously. I think if we did take ourselves really seriously at the time, we probably would have shut it down, to be honest, because like those were some of the conversations that we were having at the time, like, hey, we're getting no users, we should pivot or something. But as soon as we started having fun with it, like we got user growth, we got people interested in our brand, because I think it was like something that was organic. It came about because people had these anxieties built up over time. Any questions so far?
Nope.
Sweet. Mistake number three, I touched on this before, but not getting help sooner was definitely one of my big mistakes. I don't regret ever leaving Buns or leaving a company, because I felt like I should always trust my gut. No matter if it's wrong, at least the only person I can blame is really myself at the time. So, when I was living in California, I was like in a daze for the most part. Like I was just wandering around, going around different places and feeling a lot of anxiety kind of come up. And I realized like my situation was really far away from the reality of everyday people. These people are like living, a lot of people are just homeless. They were making like, minimum wage. They weren't able to live in a very expensive city like California or San Francisco, where like I was paying $3,500 every month in rent. And people weren't even making that much in terms of their actual paychecks. So like in that sense, I was almost forced to take a step back because the city that I was living in had such this crises of like drug abuse, of homelessness, that I had to like look at it from a different perspective. I think that was one of the reasons why I moved back to Toronto, was to figure out a way to empower people with better financial services because of the realities that I saw literally living day to day in California. And I think, if I had gotten help sooner, I probably would have come to that conclusion sooner rather than later. But ultimately, this is my journey to solving my own anxiety problems. And I think like having experienced it firsthand now, definitely take a step back, give yourself that break, because you definitely deserve it. And it's never going to be easy. Being an entrepreneur is hard. Find ways to relieve that stress, or find ways to work on a problem that actually motivates you to get up in the morning. But certainly for me, like that's been my motivator now. Is like, how do I wake up the next day and think about climate change or financial services? Because those are two things that I think we can do to empower people globally. So I've been thinking about that for quite some time. And I also hope you never feel as lost as I did at the time, because it was very depressing. It was not easy, and I don't know how else I could have gone through it if it wasn't for like my girlfriend or my family members or some of my close friends that were able to help me through that process. And if you need to reach out to me, like let me know. Happy to help you out through this journey, or if you have questions, and walk you through it, because it's hard. It's not easy, and it should definitely never be a solo challenge. Mistake number 4, it's kind of related to number 3. Like I felt like every single entrepreneur that I've talked to, if they have been successful or not, they've always said listen to your gut. Because ultimately, if you listen to someone else, you make a decision. And if it was a wrong decision, you almost feel like you made the wrong choice. But if you're making this decision yourself, then it's easier in a lot of ways. To give you an example, like leaving Buns at the time felt like an illogical choice, because like we were in the news all the time. Things were going well, user base was growing, we had raised a lot of money, but like in my gut, I just knew I had to leave, because I didn't want to be the person that brought the team down. I wanted to be the person who was better than that. When I started this crypto company in 2018, my gut said yes, go do this. My brain said no, because it just wasn't a logical thing to do. I knew nothing about financial services at the time, knew nothing about regulations and how to tackle them. But ultimately, I learned a lot through that process, and I trusted my gut in order to build a team and convince people to join me. I think that's the only reason I was successful, is because like I truly believed in what I was doing, even if it was wrong. Another example is like, when I became a product designer and eventually product leader back in 2009, that felt like a dumb idea. My parents were against it. They're like, hey, why are you going to art school? Like, why don't you become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever? But in my gut, I was like, well, I can either waste, our hard-earned money on UFT or whatever, but ultimately I won't be any more successful through that school than, some random school that was way cheaper. And I think like I'm glad that I did that, because ultimately it put me into a position of exploring new industries that I don't think I would have been exposed to otherwise. And ultimately, I've kind of come to realize like no matter what you do, the majority is always wrong. Like by the time my parents grew up and heard about becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, it's almost too late, because that's what the last generation became successful at. And for me, that was the same comparable to the tech industry. Like the tech industry started booming at the time that I was starting to think about joining that industry anyways. And I think like, in that regard, the majority is almost always wrong. Any questions so far before I go to the next one?
Nope.
Sweet. And so my last mistake, I think, at some point in time, I lost my curiosity and wonder, especially from the perspective of a child. I think I'm starting to get more and more of that recently, especially over the last year. I've been getting way more curious about like things that I have no idea how they work, but I want to explore them. Whether it's climate change, which is this entire beast of an issue, an issue, but I really want to explore it and find solutions there, whether it's through like technology or through like social behavioral changes or through financial services. I think, I'm starting to think about that a bit more. But I also realized that like, losing your childlike curiosity and wonder is part of life. It just happens to everyone. There's no one else to blame but yourself. I think the more curiosity that you can bring back into your life, the better it is, because it'll help you become either a stronger leader and have more empathy towards your peers, or it'll help you become successful at whatever venture you're building out, because you have to be endlessly curious to make that a success. And I've come to realize over the past year that if you don't want to book your days back to back with meetings and be drained by the end of it, I think it's better to focus on a problem and a mission by being endlessly curious rather than working for someone else with everything to lose. It's hard, absolutely, but it's also worth it. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, hopefully you can come to understand that there is something there to take away. And it's just a picture of my dad and I when I was younger. Like, I think, I explored a lot of different things at the time, and I wish I could have more time to go and explore more. That's it. Ask me questions. Everything's open game.
Such a cute picture.
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free to type in your questions, raise your hand if you'd like to unmute your mic and ask your question. This is really your opportunity to get advice from someone who's been through it and can really offer some valuable knowledge and tips and information to you. So really do encourage you to ask your questions now. Rashad, in the meantime, while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, I do want to thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and all of the mistakes that you've made yourself. So hopefully, the individuals joining us today won't make those same mistakes that you did. So definitely a great learning opportunity for everyone here.
Yeah, happy to help. If anyone else needs help afterwards, let me know. Go to my website or tweet at me. It's probably the easiest way to get in touch, and I'd be happy to impart more learnings or figure out how to help you in the long run.
Yeah, I see some comments coming in. It is a different session that this is compared to all of the other ones that we have in the series, but I think it's a really important session to talk about these sorts of things. I do see a few questions coming in. The one question is from Ankit. Was Buy with an Impact eventually acquired by RBC? And how does RBC Ventures work? Is it an incubator?
It's not an incubator. It's like a collective of companies, effectively. Like, there are different ventures. It's almost like a venture studio in a way. It's like different companies are being started by like people that have an interest in starting those companies. I can't speak to the the terms of our deal with RBC, but ultimately we ended up deciding to join them. And I think we made the right call at the same time, because it helped us figure out how to tackle the broader market, especially from the lens of financial services and climate change, with a big player like RBC.
I see another comment. Oh, a comment from Ryan. Appreciate your honesty you shared about your experiences, including going against your most logical decision and following your gut.
Yeah, I mean, I never regret it. I think that's been my takeaway. I think like I would definitely encourage everyone to listen to their gut, because there's something there. I don't know if it's like from the back part of your brain or something that's just hardwired into us, but definitely don't go against your gut.
Is there any other questions that anyone has? Feel free to raise your hand, unmute your mic, and ask your question. I see one just came in the chat from Ryan. It's difficult to stick to one idea and push it through to success. How do you decide on which one to focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like ideas are almost worthless unless you execute on them. So I would say like execute on as many ideas as you can, and the right idea will find you. I think like that mindset has helped me a lot over the years, and just test and learn quickly rather than spending a long time building something that nobody wanted. But also for startups, especially tech startups, timing is everything. Like, if I had launched that crypto startup like last year or even this year, I think we would have been way more successful, because oddly enough, some of the investors that we talked to that rejected us back then are starting to reach out and be like, hey, can I use that product that I heard about a couple of years ago? And we're like, well, sorry, that shut down. We pivoted to something else that eventually got acquired. We can't offer that same service anymore, but here's some comparables or whatever. So I think like timing is everything. And I don't know if anyone's read about like product zeitgeist fit, but I think I would definitely encourage you to explore that. Like if there's something in the ether, so something that's going on behind the scenes that you're kind of familiar with, and people are asking for, then definitely go build that instead.
I see another question. This one's coming in from Musaid.
Sure.
How has working with RBC Ventures affected your flexibility in going with your gut?
I don't think it's affected my gut at all. If anything, I'm stronger now through that process. Also looks badass on your resume, but ultimately for me, it's just, I'd rather just go with the flow and figure out a way to make this work. I'm still working on the same team, so I'm very thankful for that. And I think, we're going to continue working together for the foreseeable future.
Anyone else have any other questions? Anyone? Oh, I see Favor, you raised your hand. You can go ahead and unmute your mic.
Hey, nice presentation. My question is around at this point in the idea, I I've been able to get a team of like 3 people. They're only advisors. So, they have experience in tech, they have experience in marketing, but when it comes to finding the talent to actually build the software, the talent to build the pieces of hardware, I'm struggling in that area, and even like I want to do more market research just to be more sure. And I'm in that area where I want to do more market research, but at the same time, because of time, I want to start building this stuff. And so that's kind of like where I'm at right now. So just what would you say in that area?
That's a difficult one. I think there are no code and low code tools out there. There's like this one company, or there's a couple of them now, that like it's basically a spreadsheet that becomes your database, and you can connect it to any front end. Even if it doesn't exist, you can kind of pack them together. So if you can prototype it that way through these no code or low code platforms, and then figure out a way to, as I said, like hire someone that's better than you at that role and fire yourself from that role. And I think that might help out tremendously for you. What are you working on, out of curiosity?
Sure. It's so I was doing some research
Yeah.
a couple months ago. I saw that uh 10% of Canadians bought an orthotic insole, which is to reduce foot pain with how they walk, run, sit.
Yeah.
But a good amount said that because of a busy schedule, they didn't have time to exercise properly and things like that. So the idea, after speaking to, I spoke to about 40 runners as well, but the idea is to create insoles that could reduce foot pain with how you walk, run, and sit, but also measure distance, calories burns, send that information to your smartphone for competitive runners. I just got accepted into Founder Institute, so it's kicking off February 16th. Yeah, so right now the advisors are really really good people. It's just that like some of them are co-founders, right? But they're at this moment they're giving me advice, and just the people to actually put this
Are they
together.
helping you build it though, or are they just taking equity as an advisor?
So they're not taking equity. So they're, I would say they're mentors, but they told me, you know what, put my name down as an advisor when you're going for a pitch and get some hopefully credibility. But it's at the end. So I'm just trying to make sure that I use this. I don't waste your time as well. Because I'm speaking to this individuals, but just get things going. I got some help from
Yeah.
Tech
If I were you, like I would find a co-founder that's a builder as well, have them build it in conjunction, because the last thing you want is like a bunch of advisors that are not helping you build it. And
Got it.
ultimately, I think that'll look worse for you over time. Like, hey, you spend like the last 6 months or a year building something, but you have so many advisors and you haven't actually shipped anything. Then if you found a co-founder, even if it doesn't look as strong on the pitch decks or whatever, as long as you're building it and there's something there as in terms of the market, and you get it out there quickly and you can learn and test from that, then you can add as many advisors as you want. And like ultimately for the time being, just build it if you think there's something there.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so I see a few more questions in the
Sure.
chat. The next one is coming from Rose. So you mentioned working at Facebook helped you figure out how to scale. Do you have any thoughts or advice to pass along that can help us scale?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook was a different beast, right? Like 20,000 employees, no joke. And having understood now how they got to that scale is kind of nice. but ultimately it becomes an effort to decentralize decision making. So you're not the choke point. Let's say, I was head of product at whatever company, or even if I was the CEO of my company, it's like people shouldn't have to rely on me for every decision. That's not what teams do, and that's not how they scale. So if you can find a way to either provide context of like, hey, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, but leave the implementation details to like the engineering team, the product team, or the design team, or whoever it is, and let them converse and actually come to conclusions. That's a better model to think about, rather than being like, hey, I want to make the decision, or this our head of product makes the decisions, or whatever it is. And ultimately, that's what I learned at Facebook. Is like, we can go and run these tests, experiment with it, and then figure out a way to break them down functionally, so each team can go and figure out how to best implement that later on. I think that's how they were able to be successful. And they say what you will about Facebook, but they know how to monetize a business. Like, they're insanely powerful when it comes to that. It's because they're able to decentralize decision making and let people run with ideas as much as they can.
Okay, so next question that we have comes from Rachel. What advice do you have on approaching people or organizations that you are interested in partnering with?
Yeah, I've had to do it just through cold calling for a lot of times. I found like Twitter works really well. I was able to get like into the DMs of like Stripe CEO, for example. Like I sent him a message like, hey man, can I talk to you about launching this credit card? Does this carbon offset? He reply back. It's kind of crazy. So I think like, it's your opportunity to lose. If you need to cold call or find other ways to reach out to these people, go and do that. I don't know if you can expand on that question, but like that's how I would approach it. But I'm curious if you're looking for something else.
Okay, so yeah, Rachel, if you want to expand, you can feel free to do so in the chat. In the meantime, let's go to the next question. Next question is coming from Victoria. How have you upskilled in product development and motivated your team? Do you suggest any outside courses or learnings?
Ooh, I'm self-taught, so I'm probably the wrong person to talk to about courses or learnings. Like I went to art school for film and video work, got into tech and product, and learned it myself. I think like for me, it's always been, at least lately, about providing enough context to the team members so they can go make the decision. As ultimately, that's the kind of trust that I want to put in people, and that's the trust that they're expecting of me as well. And ultimately, I think being able to show people abstract ideas of like what the future could look like through some of the mockups that I created, for example, with Buy with Impact, that help the team understand what the future opportunities are from this credit card, right? To give you an example, like when we're launching this credit card, we're like, okay, well, what if you could invest this cash back that we gave you into not just carbon offsetting projects, but eventually stocks from publicly traded companies? And that's a pretty abstract idea, but ultimately through a mockup, they were able to see that this could just be a tab on the homepage, or maybe there's a push notification that says, hey, we thought that you bought from X, Y, and Z company, that they have a climate commitment. Click here to buy the stock and vote with your actual dollars. So ultimately, I think my job has really become about providing enough context of what's possible and what the future looks like, and letting everyone else do what they do best in terms of executing on that roadmap.
Now, this next question is a little bit related to. Just want to remind everyone to keep their mics on mute. Unless you have a question, you can use the raise hand function in your reactions. But yeah, next question is sort of, I guess it's related to Victoria's question. But when you first started learning about a new industry, like how you learned about financial services or economics for like finance, what were some resources or courses that helped you at that time?
Yeah, just luckily, like in this day and age, you can go to Google and find an article or PDF about almost everything. In terms of economics, I took this economics 101 class at U of T, like in my spare time. Can't remember what it's called, but ultimately I got to know some of the professors there, and they helped me a lot in terms of thinking about economics, understanding monetary policy, and what questions to ask around that. So I got lucky there, but those were just relationships that I had to establish over time and learn from. I mean, Twitter has been a gold mine of like just people thinking about things from different lenses. A lot of Substack newsletters. So I think you kind of have to go out of your way and make the internet work for you. But ultimately, there is a lot of research involved in that process. I also talked to like a lot of lawyers. We got lucky with the CDL, with the Creative Destruction Lab program, for example. They set us up with this law firm, and we got into their startup program. It was very cheap. It was like $5,000 a year, and you can get like 20 hours a week, or sorry, 20 hours a month from some of these lawyers. And they helped us understand a lot about like regulatory environments and how to think about them, and they shared their resources. And oftentimes it was free of charge. Like, even if we did end up going over 20 hours, they're like, yeah, whatever, we'll deal with this afterwards. So ultimately, I think, use your network, use some of these programs that exist out there. Definitely use the internet as much as possible, because the education material is out there, but you just got to make use of it yourself.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. If anyone else has last minute questions, feel free to raise your hand now, because we are coming towards the end of the session. And I do want to remind you that my associate Julia did post the link to our survey. So if you can please take 1 minute just to complete that and just to let us know how we did today, that would be very much appreciated. Yep, she just posted it again in the link just in case you missed the first time. If there are any other questions, you can also send us an email. But Rashab, I do want to thank you again for all of the amazing insight you provided, and all of the questions that you answered as well, for all of the individual situations that everyone is going through at the time. So thank you so much. Really do appreciate you dedicating your time tonight.
Hey, happy to help. Feel free to reach out if I can help in any way. If you're raising money, let me know as well. I'm down to figure out a way to not just impart my learnings, but also provide you with capital.
For sure. And I do want to remind everyone that the session tonight is recorded and will be posted on our WiseSpace YouTube channel next week. I also do want to remind everyone that we do have applications open for our WiseSpace Tech Accelerator program. So this program, we have applications open until February 21st, and it's a 4-month program focused on technology accelerators looking to really scale their startup and grow. We also do have applications still open for our Venture Catalyst program. Applications are closing on February 25th for that. We also have a really great food accelerator program as well that applications just opened for, and that one is available on our website. And Julia will place a link in the chat for that one as well. I do want to remind you that we do have another great session coming up next week on building a social enterprise. Rashab touched on mental health a lot during this, so I do want to emphasize that we do have a session fully dedicated to mental health coming up on February 11th. And just a reminder that you do have to register for each session. And you will be sent the Zoom link once you do complete that registration. So again, all of the events take place from 6 to 8 p.m. And we hope to see you all again next week. Thank you all for joining us, and take care. Bye, everyone.